This video is not a review, nor is it a summary. It's a critical analysis of the story of Cowboy Bebop, and I'm going to be doing this by showing you a segment of episode 2 and then follow it with commentary discussing the narrative elements and cinematography. And I'll leave annotations on the video so you can just skip straight to the commentary if you want. But before we begin, I want to talk about the point of episode 2 since it's very easy to just brush it off as filler. And the point of episode 2, aside from introducing Ayn, is to compare Spike and Abdul so that we can learn about Spike. So episode 2 in short is like a proper introduction to the kind of person Spike is, and it lays the focus on Spike in a more direct way than episode 1 does. And as a result, we get more concrete details about the kind of person Spike is at heart. And at the end of the video, I'll also discuss what else episode 2 accomplishes, but I just wanted to get that out of the way in the beginning. And with that being said, let's begin. Here we have Abdul, and I want us to look at his character design. He's tall, thin, has big puffy hair, and is wearing a cowboy vest and knows martial arts, and is based off a Bruce Lee movie character. Now let's compare him to Spike. Spike is also tall, thin, has big puffy hair, and while he isn't dressed like a cowboy, he's a literal cowboy in the sense that he's a bounty hunter. And he knows martial arts and is also based off a Bruce Lee character, or Bruce Lee himself. So notice how we can superficially describe these two in a very similar manner. Now you may think I'm reaching right now, but wait till we go through the analysis. I promise that this episode goes out of its way to make the viewer think that Spike and Abdul are very similar people. Now in this scene, the main idea is that they're broke. The TV's broken, the spaceship is in need of repairs, Spike is asking for a discount on information that's already cheap, and unlike episode 1, Spike is extremely enthusiastic about this bounty, since he really wants money. And now it's true that the Bebop crew is always broke, but what is special here is that out of every episode in the show, this scene makes the biggest deal out of it. And this isn't for the sake of introducing it, because the idea was already introduced in episode 1. So usually they'll mention money or hunger and then move on quickly to the next thing. But in this scene, they're specifically trying to hammer the idea that the crew is super broke by repeating it multiple times in a row and letting the idea linger. In other words, the director wants us to pay special attention to this because it plays a special importance in episode 2 other than just providing motive or progressing the plot. What this means is that for the rest of the episode, we should judge the characters' actions specifically in light of them being broke. And also notice that Ayn is indirectly being referred to in this scene as treasure by Jet. And I think this may be a form of ironic wordplay that hints at the overall themes of episode 2. And I'll refer back to this as we go further in the analysis. Just for now, remember it that he's being referred to as treasure. Here we have Abdul dealing with a sort of shadowy organization. Pay attention to the background, it's like a gold dragon. And this is very reminiscent of the Red Dragon Syndicate, especially because this story takes place on Mars. And I can almost imagine that being like a mark of their territory or something. And this doesn't necessarily mean it's them, but it is a subtle way of making us think of Spike while we watch Abdul if you're coming back to rewatch episode 2. But the main thing I want us to focus on is the dialogue. Abdul says it's a surefire winner, and now compare that to what Spike says further up on the scene. And Spike says, "I've got this nailed." They're both saying the same thing. They're both doing what Jet says, counting their chickens early. So this episode is comparing Spike and Abdul through the dialogue to give us an example of how they're the same. Now this bar fight scene I left for last, even though it happens earlier in the clip. And I did that because I believe it references another episode. So here we see Abdul, right, starting a bar fight because he gets pushed. Spike does the same exact thing in episode 7, Heavy Metal Queen. In that episode, Spike, like Abdul, is minding his business when he gets pushed, spills his drink, and then he starts a fight as a result. So at this point, the viewer doesn't know it, but we're getting another Spike Abdul parallel. And I think the show does this on purpose. You're kind of meant to rewatch the show so you can pick up on all these things. So far, let's recap. We have Abdul and Spike. They seem to be very similar so far, right? You know, in character design and in personality. And the Bebop is in heavy need of cash, and the episode gave more attention to that than usual. So just keep those two things in mind, and let's go on to the next clip of the show. Now here we get some more dialogue, and we learn that Spike is street smart, sociable, he knows how to get info, and in general we get the sense that he's like a competent person, or a competent bounty hunter I should say. And we also get a reference to the Bruce Lee movie here, which I think helps clue us into the idea that both Spike and Abdul are characters inspired by Bruce Lee movies. And what I want to take a second to appreciate is the directing of episode 2 by looking at this shot here. And this is called an establishing shot. And all it does is show us the setting and where the characters are in the shared space. But look at the point of view they chose for it, right? It's like very interesting and like there's a lot of detail and it looks pretty. I would call it pretty. And I won't mention this again, but if you stop and notice the camera shots and cuts used throughout episode 2, you'll notice that they use very dynamic shots, not only for action, but also for simple moments like this. And it's these small bits of directing, in my opinion, that really make Cowboy Bebop stand out compared to other anime. It's a great form of storytelling that I wish was more common in anime. It's just something to look out for when you're rewatching Cowboy Bebop because it's so well done and fluid, you might not notice it consciously. And also, I'm going to be bringing up camera shots again soon, and it's going to be more relevant, so just keep it in mind. Now, let's look at the events of this scene. Here we have Spike who points a gun in a person's face, and then right after that we get the same exact thing with Abdul. And we also get the line of dialogue saying "not this again" from the turtle lady. Now, if you saw my first analysis video, then you might remember that this is the same repetition trick they use for the structure of episode 1. So here we're being invited to notice that Spike and Abdul are similar by showing how in the same exact situation they'll do like extremely similar things, right? Here we have the first chase scene between Abdul and Spike. And there's a ton of parallelism in the composition of this chase scene, and they even use the same cuts and camera angles for Spike and Abdul. So I'll give you a second to look at that. Now, these camera angles are called low-angle shots, and they're usually used to make a character look dominant over another, or to make a character look powerful or even heroic. What's interesting here is that for all the shots leading up to the confrontation on the bridge, Spike and Abdul have both shared the camera economy equally. So because of that, we get the sense that these two are equal to each other or reflective of one another. So even though Abdul's the bad guy, we don't really feel like Abdul's like gonna lose. Like, you know what I'm saying? And after getting all this subtle suggestion, the viewer is probably expecting an exciting fight at this point between them. But strangely, instead of getting that fight, we get this weird cutaway from the fight, and you can't even see it. This is important because it means that the camera work wasn't for the sake of setting up the fight. Otherwise, they would have just shown the fight like they do in every other episode. So that means the point is for us to see the parallelism in the characters and the scene and compare them. And after the next clip, we'll see why this comparison is so important. But for now, you should just keep in mind that the episode is, in my opinion, blatantly trying to say that Spike and Abdul are the same. Now here we have another comparison to Spike and Abdul. But this is more interesting than the rest so far, and I would say more important too.
Kids and pets.
Spike says he hates kids and animals, right? Now, if you've seen the whole show, you know that Spike's list includes women with attitudes as well. But he leaves that out, which makes sense since there aren't any around. But then that begs the question, why mention kids if there's only a dog here? The point I'm trying to make is that the writers are purposely being selective at this moment with his dialogue. And the cut that follows this dialogue is why. It cuts to a scene of Abdul and kids. So let's review. We know Spike hates kids and animals because he says so, right? And we know Abdul hates kids and animals because of the way he treats them. You know, we just saw how he treats kids. He pushes them around for like no reason because he's a jerk. So if we take a step back and look at the whole show, we know that Spike does in fact like kids and animals and women with attitudes because of Faye, Ayn, and Edward, and I guess Julia too. So we're being subtly introduced to the idea that Spike's words don't equate to what he actually feels. And this is interesting because the show, or I should say episode, so far has tried to persuade us to think that Abdul and Spike are similar or the same kind of person, you know, like very violent and just hate things. But this similarity here of them both hating kids is only true if we take Spike's words at face value. And we know we shouldn't do that, obviously. By comparing this dialogue with the scene that follows, we know that on a deeper level, these men are very different. And this observation will become more apparent when we reach the end of the episode, or I should say when we talk about the end of the episode. But before that, let's look at this one last comparison of Spike and Abdul, which is kind of funny. They both use fortune teller-like things to find what they're looking for. Like the way Spike uses a Native American to find things is the way Abdul uses this guy. So it's just one more similarity. It's kind of weird actually, but yeah, just mentioning it. This final scene here, when Spike saves Ayn, is the reason the show spent a lot of time comparing Spike and Abdul. Now, at this point, we know Spike is desperate for cash, right? And Abdul is worth 8 million wulangs. But as soon as Spike sees that Ayn, who according to Spike is a worthless mutt, and despite being a self-proclaimed animal hater, decides to give up the bounty and save a dog. And at the moment that Spike makes that choice, he didn't know that Abdul would crash, you know? So as far as Spike is concerned, when he does this, he's letting go of the 8 mil, you know? And he shows this in his dialogue. I think he makes like a grunt, or he shows his anger at having to make this choice. So now at the end of the day, when Spike says things like "I hate animals," we know he's full of shit. And despite all their similarities between Abdul and Spike, we know the real difference between him and his pseudo twin Abdul is that Spike is the type of person who saves a puppy, and Abdul's the kind who kidnaps them and then tries to sell them to like shady people. And this right here, this is the reason episode 2 is important from a, you know, structural point of view, like why you should watch episode 2 after episode 1 and not before any other episode. It's because now as of episode 2, we can say with certainty that Spike is the kind of person who does not say what he feels. And in the future, we should take that into account when it comes to his emotions. That's why it's important. Like, there's a reason episode 2 is episode 2. It's because it teaches you this right off the bat, so you're prepared now for the rest of the show. Now, before ending the analysis, there is one more thing worth discussing. And remember that I said Jet indirectly called Ayn a treasure and that it was, like, ironic? Well, they're still broke. They still need repairs. They didn't get any bounty. But despite this, these two guys decided to adopt a dog and add another expense by having one more mouth to feed. And unlike Faye and Ed, who can at least help with bounties, Ayn can't do anything really. He's just there. And they do this because Ayn is a treasure. He's priceless, and what he offers is friendship. Like, do you understand? Like, take a second to take all that in. Like, they're super broke and they just adopted a dog. Jet and Spike care more about having a pet than they do about money. In other words, they desire companionship more than money. And I'm sorry if I'm getting loud. It's making me smile just saying this. So, in conclusion, the purpose of this episode was to teach the viewer that in Cowboy Bebop, Spike and Jet's words are covers for what they really feel. And it is by their actions, not their words, that we should judge them. And that they're super lonely. At least lonely enough to get a dog they probably can't afford. And that's the end. So that's the end, and I hope you enjoyed. I know episode 2 isn't as interesting as episode 1. And full disclosure, not every episode will be as interesting as episode 1. Like, episode 1 was, like, extremely well done. But I hope at least you found the same kind of value from this video as you found from my first one, if not as much. And yeah, that's it. So I think I'm going to upload an update video about what I plan to do next, and just in general talk about what's up with me and what I want to do. It should be short, like 5 or 6 minutes tops. And yeah, if you want to just check that out, go ahead. You don't have to. It's just, I feel like weird not saying anything to you guys because you guys seem to like what I'm uploading. And yeah, thanks. If you got to the end, thank you. I appreciate it. I really do. And I'll try to make my next Bebop video come out sooner rather than later. So yeah, till the next one. Peace.